Okay, good evening. I hope everyone has been enjoying their retreat so far. We've spent almost a week practicing together, and I've been really enjoying just this physical location is quite wonderful, just to be able to spend some time in this forest with a very nice lake here. So it's definitely a very nice location, very conducive for developing our meditation, and we have just about one day left, one full day. So hopefully we have put forth a lot of skillful effort, and we can finish with one more day of practice together. And we've spent a lot of time this past week talking a lot about how to make the mind peaceful, and practicing a lot of mindfulness of breathing and attending to the body in order to calm the mind. And this is generally considered samatha practice, practice that's aimed at making the mind peaceful. And last night Ajahn was speaking a bit about vipassana, or insight meditation, and I think it's good, especially at the end of the retreat, to kind of speak a bit about this development of insight, because it's something which is crucial in the meditation that the Buddha taught. So Buddhist meditation, you can say, has these two elements to it, samatha and vipassana, or calming the mind, pacifying the mind, and then using that calm mind to investigate our own body, our own mind, investigate the world around us. So these two elements to meditation, making the mind peaceful and then using that peace to investigate. And Luang Por said that these two elements are like two ends of the same stick. So they're kind of the two aspects of right meditation, the meditation that really leads to real happiness. It has to have both of these elements, and in cultivating one, then we have to cultivate the other to some extent, in order to for both of them to really progress. In the same way that lifting one end of the stick, you can't lift it very high before you have to lift the other end of the stick as well. So if we only develop one, then our practice will definitely be very limited. So oftentimes we're encouraged to first learn how to make the mind peaceful through samatha practice, attending to the breath. And then once the mind becomes peaceful, then we can use the clarity and the power of the mind to investigate our experience. And I think probably people nowadays, they might not really understand why we need to investigate things. We often say that we investigate in order to see the truth of the way things are, the way things really are. But, most people nowadays, they think that they already know the way that things are. We tend to think that we already understand everything. We feel quite sure that we know who we are. We feel that we are this body, we are this personality. We're quite sure of that. We feel like we understand just about everything in the world. We live in a particular country, and we understand the political situation there. We understand all of the things in the world, the natural world. We understand history. We have a very solid worldview, and there's not really much that we feel that we don't know. And if ever we have a question about the world, it's something that we somehow we don't know, then we just ask Google, and Google can always basically fill in the blanks, anything that we don't really know. So people nowadays probably wouldn't really understand what is the point of investigating. I feel like there's not really much else that they could learn about the world. But I think a good simile for this is like staring at your hand and just looking at the hand. You can see, well, there's 5 fingers, and there's some skin, and there's some lines on the hand, and just looking at it, it's like that kind of seems like pretty much it for the hand. In terms of describing it, it seems like a pretty simple thing. We might feel like we pretty much know everything there is to know about the hand, just by observing it in that way. But the reality is, if we actually put the hand underneath a microscope, a really high-powered microscope, suddenly we realize there's a whole universe of activity going on in the hand that we were completely unaware of. So this is is a good example of being mistaken about what we really know. And certainly the teachers encourage us to investigate the world of our experience, because they tell us that the things that we perceive, the things that we know, are maybe only a fraction of a whole universe of activities and possibilities and truths about the world. And so this investigation, developing insight, it's not only just to find out things about the world, because we're curious or because we want to, experience everything that there is to experience. But this investigation, it has a very practical purpose to it, and that is, the Buddha tells us that all of our suffering, all of our unhappiness is coming from delusion. It's coming from not understanding. So that if we actually come to see the world and ourselves in the light of truth, how we actually really are, the Buddha assures us that all of our suffering will be overcome at that point. So it's something that's incredibly relevant to all of us who seek happiness. And the Buddha and the teachers will tell us that if we have suffering, then that's proof that we don't really understand completely what's going on. We don't completely understand who we are or the world around us. And a good example of the way in which delusion can lead to suffering is like walking through the forest on a path, and suddenly you see a snake in front of you on the path, and you immediately freeze, and you're filled with great fear, and you stand there for a number of seconds, just frozen with terror at seeing the snake and hoping that it doesn't attack. But then as you stare at it, suddenly you realize it's not a snake at all, it's just a stick, and you're mistaken. And as soon as you realize that, then all of the fear disappears, all of the suffering disappears. And the stick, it was always a stick. It was never a snake, even in the beginning. There was never anything there to be afraid of, and there was never anything there to suffer over. It's just something that completely came from our mind. It came from believing in a delusion, believing in a misperception. And this is, very much what we're doing all the time. The Buddha and the teachers say that, all of our suffering is coming from this same kind of process. Our suffering, it seems to make a lot of sense. It's incredibly convincing, and we feel like we have to suffer in many different ways. But the the teachers that point out that when we come to really see truth, then it's just like realizing that that snake is not actually a snake at all. It's actually just a stick. And seeing through our delusion, then the mind is able to let go of the world. The mind is able to overcome all of the causes, the sources of its suffering. So there are many different ways of developing insight, contemplation, practice, and there's many different objects that we can contemplate. You could say that really there's actually no limit to what we can contemplate. We can contemplate anything in the world. We're usually encouraged to begin with the body, with our own body, and then eventually contemplating the mind. But we can also contemplate anything in the world, history or the natural world. All of it is Dhamma. All of it has the truth. We can see the truth in anything that we contemplate. So using samatha and vipassana together, usually we're encouraged to learn how to make the mind peaceful before we contemplate, because there's this relationship between how peaceful the mind is and how clearly it can see. And the Buddha gave the famous simile of a bowl of water that has many different impurities in it, like dye and mud and things like this. And so long as it has those impurities in it, you can't really see your reflection in the water. Or if you can see it, it's not really clear, or it's distorted in some way. So by removing those impurities, then one is able to see one's reflection perfectly. So this is like a simile for removing the defilements from the mind. So we tend to use samatha practice, mindfulness of the breathing and mindfulness of the body, to calm the mind, and calming the mind then becomes clear. So there's this relationship between how peaceful our mind is and how clearly we can see things around us. But it's also important to emphasize that the practice of samatha and vipassana, they don't have to be practiced one after the other. A lot of times it might be presented like that, like we must practice samatha to a particular level before we ever practice vipassana. But the Buddha definitely said that people are different, and some people will practice one more than the other. Some people will practice one first before the other. Some people develop one for quite a while before switching to the other, and some people will develop them both at the same time, just in the same way that somebody uses both the right and the left leg to walk somewhere. So we can see for ourselves, what is most helpful for us and what works. For a lot of people, I think, tend to find that if we begin with contemplation and the mind isn't peaceful, then it tends to not really go anywhere. It tends to not really lead to any kind of real insight. And that's, very much like when we think about things normally, when the mind is not peaceful, usually thinking just tends to agitate our mind. And that's, basically just because our minds are not peaceful. They're experiencing some kind of defilement. And then, thinking from a place of defilement, it tends to just lead to more defilement. Whereas the opposite is true. The more that we're able to make our mind peaceful, then to think from that place of peace, it tends to make the mind more peaceful. So this is like, the difference between, I think the main difference between contemplation and just our ordinary thinking is just where is it coming from. Ordinary thinking tends to come from defilement, whereas, real contemplation is coming from a balanced mindfulness, it's coming from the peacefulness of the mind. So then developing this insight, this contemplation is also something that we can, for particular people, we can even just begin with vipassana meditation, and in a way it kind of works as a samatha. It can calm the mind down for some people who really enjoy thinking. We just have to pay attention for ourselves, to see if when we think about things, when we contemplate things, does it make the mind peaceful or not? If it leads to boredom or confusion or other defilements, agitation, then we should just focus more on samatha in that particular situation. And the objects that we can investigate are, like I was mentioning, really, without limit. We can investigate anything, but usually the teachers encourage us to investigate the body, and really investigating the body to a very deep level before we start to really deeply investigate the mind. But this is only kind of a general guideline. It's totally possible and fine to contemplate the mind first or to contemplate other things. But I think the point is that until we really deeply understand the body, then we won't be able to really deeply understand the mind. But there can be, kind of a superficial insights that can happen on both levels, and in anything that we contemplate. So we can have a lot of flexibility in our contemplation. But beginning with the body, there's many different ways of contemplating the body, and some of the ways that are really emphasized by the teachers. We can visualize particular parts of the body, and it can be any part of the body that seems to interest the mind, that we have some kind of pull towards. We can imagine, what is that part of the body? What is it like if it's separated from the body? For example, just the hair. Ajahn was mentioning the other day, about the hair kind of getting washed down into the drain and clogging up the drain. It's a really great example. When the hair is on our head, then we think it's something very beautiful, and we like to take care of it, and it's something that we cherish. But just seconds later, it falls off, and it is in the drain, and now suddenly it's something that's disgusting. It's something we don't want to touch. We don't want to look at it. It's the same hair. It's the exact same object. Why has our perception changed like that? So we can contemplate any of the parts of the body, and the teachers often talk about, sometimes even just imagining separating all of the parts of the body. You have the bones here and the skin in a different pile. And, if the mind is not peaceful, usually, the mind will maybe not really be interested in this kind of contemplation. So if we find that bringing this up for contemplation leads to boredom, or it leads to irritation or restlessness, there's just a clear sign that the mind is not in a proper state to contemplate it at that time. So we can just go back to samatha practice. We can just go back to learning how to make the mind peaceful, and then come back to that contemplation at some point in the future. But if we find that contemplating the body or anything really interests the mind, and it's like a wholesome interest, like there's an interest and a fascination, and it's being used with the practice of mindfulness, and we find that contemplating in this way makes the mind more peaceful, then or also creates a sense of joy. There's a sense of joy and starting to see things in a way that we haven't seen them like before. This is all very good signs that it's the proper time to contemplate that object. And if we contemplate the body, we might find that, looking at particular parts of the body, we imagine what would somebody be like without their hair, without their eyes. This I really enjoy the practice of just imagining somebody without their eyes. It's kind of, for me, I feel like so much of the individual person is in their eyes, and you really realize that if you picture somebody just without their eyes, the rest of the person is exactly the same, but as soon as they don't have their eyes, it's kind of like they're no longer really an individual person. It's more like a puppet or kind of like a robot or something. So this is it's a good example of how, using contemplation, we can start to pierce through our delusions about things. We don't really realize that the way that we see the body and the way that we see everything in the world is based on habitual perceptions, based on habitual ways of seeing the body and the world, and they're just so automatic that we don't even realize. We just take it for granted, as an experience of the world. We see the body as attractive or as unattractive. We see it as an individual person. That is another person. They're different than me, and this is me. All of these ways of seeing the body are, things we just are completely natural to us. We don't even question that they could not be real. They could not, not have some kind of reality to them. They just seem so incredibly convincing. And so long as the mind is clouded with defilement, then in the same way, when we look in the bowl of water and it has impurities in it, then we can't really see our reflection clearly. And we spend our whole days looking at the body or other people's bodies. We see people, we're interacting with people all the time, every day of our life. But we don't ever really see the truth of the body. And I was remembering, I spent a number of years living in Thailand, and one of the really rare opportunities if you're a monk in Thailand is sometimes you're allowed to go to autopsies, and they'll invite the monks to go see an autopsy as a way of contemplating the body and really being able to see the body up close, the insides of the body, which is something that, particularly in our culture, is almost unheard of, probably really. So I had the opportunity to see two of those autopsies, and standing almost within arm's reach of the body, which had just recently passed away, less than 24 hours before. This was the police hospital, so oftentimes it was somebody who had died a violent death. Having that experience of being able to be very close to the body and actually see the body for what it is, and looking inside the body. And I found, not only that extremely, helpful, but when I reflect on it, there's another thing that is really interesting about that experience, was that there were these two men who were kind of the ones who were performing the autopsy. So they were the ones that were doing all of the physical work of, kind of cutting the body open and, doing all of this, this kind of the practical aspects of this autopsy, opening the body. And I thought, these two men, this is basically what they do for a living. They probably just cut open bodies every day, for many years. But looking at them, I could tell from their mannerisms and the way that they acted that they were, they're quite coarse people, and it seemed quite obvious that they definitely weren't enlightened. And it's quite fascinating that somebody can spend many years, maybe even their whole life, every day, seeing the insides of the body, seeing the body for what it really is, and yet, I'm guessing that they probably really didn't develop much or any insight in that experience. So this is like, we don't quite have that experience, but even just seeing the outside of the body, if we really had wisdom, if we really had a peaceful mind, it's enough just to see the outside of the body to be able to know the reality of what the body really is and what it isn't. But for these two men, because they most likely hadn't developed samatha practice, they hadn't learned how to make the mind peaceful, then even when they're presented with the truth of the body in a way in which you think that you couldn't mistake that, it's how can you still think that the body is attractive when you really see the insides of the body? How can you think that it's really still an individual person, or like this body is still me? But somehow those delusions are extremely deep. They run extremely deep in our mind, and it's really only through learning how to remove the defilements of the mind and making the mind peaceful that we can temporarily remove that layer of delusion and come to see the body for what it really is. And for myself, having seen the insides of those bodies, I think the one thing that I really made an impression on me, really stood out for me, was realize if you look at like anatomy books or something on different organs and look at the insides of the body, so often the different organs are presented in like different colors, and it looks like there's this whole kind of is kind of all of this complexity, and everything is very neat and in there, but you actually see the inside of the body, and it's basically like it's like going to the supermarket and going to the meat aisle, and there's just this whole aisle of different kinds of meat, but it all looks the same. It's just all red meat, and certainly the organs, they're not all the same shape. So there is, there's some kind of difference, and there's maybe slight differences in colors and things. But what was really striking, looking inside the body, is like, this is just part of nature. It's not, my mind doesn't usually think about the body like this. My mind, the mind thinks that the body is something special and unique, and it's an individual person, and my body is different than other people's bodies. But actually, if you really look inside, all of the bodies, they're all the same. So this is, we start to contemplate in this way. If the mind is peaceful, this can really start to break through so many of our delusions, not only just desire for the body, but particularly our identification with the body. This body is me, and that those bodies are other than me. They're different people. We can save all of our suffering, all of our defilements. They're all arising out of this sense of self. They're all supported by and feeding off of this sense of self. Desire, anger, fear, it's all about me. I want things. for myself, because I want to protect myself and I want to get pleasant things for myself. Other people, they make me angry because they say mean things to me. They insult me. They're insulting who I am as a person. They're damaging my reputation, and we fear losing things because things that I own, I'm afraid to lose. So it's all of our suffering, all of our defilements. They're all coming from this sense of self, which we all we take for granted. We take that sense of self to be completely true and real, and no one would ever question that sense of self. But the Buddha is encouraging us to take a closer look, and particularly starting with the body, because this is really where so much of our identification is. Where so much of our identity is in the body. And if we really start to look at the body in these ways, we may be quite shocked to start to see, in short periods at first and then longer over time, we may start to see that we've been completely mistaken about who we are. And this is the point of insight, is, seeing into something, seeing deeply into something, seeing what is the true nature of things. And in addition to contemplating the body, then, we can also contemplate the mind and looking at our emotions and our mental states. We can contemplate, what kind of delusions do we have that surround our emotions and surround our mental states. And Luang Por Chah said that the fastest way to enlightenment was to point to one's mind and say, liar. And it's we can do this with every emotion that arises, and all of our emotions, they always tell us things. We have many thoughts that arise with our emotions, and those thoughts support our emotions, and they empower them. And all of our negative emotions, they're all based in lies, basically. We have desire. It tells us that if we just have a particular object or a particular experience, that will really do it this time. That will really be the thing that really makes me happy for the rest of my life. All I need is that object or experience, and it will be able to give me pleasure and happiness for the rest of my life. And it's just completely false. It's a complete lie. We know from our own life that we just, the mind just tends to get bored with things. We can never find something that brings us the same amount of pleasure over time, because everything is always changing, and because of impermanence. Not only the objects of the world are changing, but the way that they make us feel is always changing. Just because something makes us happy today, it's not necessarily going to make us happy tomorrow, or it might make us less happy. Because of that, this idea that desire always it sells us this lie, but it's always so convincing. So when we have a desire for something, then we can contemplate, in that moment, is it really true? Is it true what the desire is telling me? The same with anger. Just like Ajahn Dhamma was mentioning last night, usually when we get angry at somebody, we have this very fixed image of who they are. They're complete monster, they're 100% bad, they've never done anything good in their life, and they're just completely evil. And, that's what our anger tells us, and that's what we believe because it seems so convincing in that moment. But, of course, that's also completely untrue. Even people who do a lot of bad things, they can't be 100% bad. And, certainly I think for most everyone that we experience in our lives, we're probably not interacting with people who are truly evil. The people that we know and that we associate with. I've always found for myself that all of the people in my life who have hurt me and who did things that I felt were really inappropriate, and I had a lot of pain and anger towards, every single one of them without exception. If I really think about it, I can think about something kind that they did to me, or I can think about something kind that they did for somebody else. I can think about something good within them that I saw, and I can also realize that, how they were in that moment when they treated me with some kind of negativity, they aren't actually always like that. When we're overcome by anger, we don't see that. We're convinced by this lie that this particular person is this way. They're always that way. So we can question. We can use contemplation to contemplate the object of our anger. Is it really the way that our emotion is telling us? And also with fear, our fear and anxiety, is also so often, we feel like the more that we worry about something, that somehow the better off we're going to be. This is kind of like one of the lies of fear and anxiety. I have to worry about a particular thing that I'm going to be doing tomorrow, because if I don't worry about it, then I might be unprepared. I need to worry about it and think about all of the possibilities and everything that might happen, and then figure out what I'll do in that particular situation if that happens, and that somehow that's going to make things better for me. But of course, the reality is that anxiety and fear, they just always make things worse. The more anxious we are, we tend to make more mistakes. We tend to have difficulties doing things that we normally wouldn't have difficulty with. Instead of improving the situation, fear just always tends to make things worse, make things more difficult for ourselves. And so questioning our fears and our anxieties, are they really well-founded? Even if it is like something that seems like we should be afraid of it, like a snake or something. The reality is, if we're really paralyzed with fear, we won't respond in the best way to that snake. It's like it's a good thing to have some kind of caution and concern about things in life sometimes that are dangerous or that we need to pay attention to. But fear is really never, it's never useful, really. Even in that situation, if we're afraid of the snake, we might end up doing something that scares the snake and makes it attack us or something. If the mind is peaceful, then we'll be able to just be present with the snake in a way that is, we have some kind of caution and concern, but we're not, we're not kind of acting in a way that makes things worse for ourselves. So this is, an example of using contemplation to look at our emotions, our mental states, and, contemplating the way that things appear. Is that really how they are? Is it really the case that this thing is good, that thing is bad, desirable, undesirable? So questioning, investigating the body and the mind. The more we do this with samatha, the more they both support our this path of peace, a path of happiness. They're both in support of happiness and in undermining and in overcoming our defilements. So, of course, as I mentioned before, the one delusion and lie that the mind tells us that runs through all of our suffering is the delusion of me, the delusion of a sense of self. And this is quite a radical teaching of the Buddha. We can maybe say it is the ultimate teachings of the Buddha is encouraging us to take a look at who we really are. And most people, assume that they know who they are, but the Buddha is really encouraging us to take a closer look and to see whether these things are true or not. And I was thinking, there's a great story of Luang Por Chah, and he was asked to describe the teachings of the Buddha like in one sentence, or he was asked what is the essence of the Buddha's teaching in a short description as possible. And Luang Por Chah, very brilliantly picked up a stick and asked, is this stick big or small? And the person doesn't really know how to answer. And then Luang Por Chah says, if you wanted to build a house with this stick, then the stick is too small. But if you wanted to use it as a toothpick, then it's far too big. And this is incredibly profound. It's like, the stick is just something that exists in nature, but all of the qualities of it, what we think about it, whether it's big, small, good or bad, what its purpose is, where it comes from, all things that our mind is just projecting onto our experience. And it's not just with sticks, it's with everything. Our entire experience of the world is based on projections coming from our mind, and based on our mind making sense of things. But the problem is that the mind which is trying to make sense of things is filled with delusion, it's filled with defilement. So the way that we see things and we perceive things is not actually in line with truth. It's not actually in line with the way that things really are. And sometimes we might think that really coming to see the way things are, maybe that we might be afraid of that. We might be unsure. What will that really be like? What if I don't have a sense of self? If everything is impermanent, is that really a place that I want to live? Is that really an experience that I want to have? And I was thinking, there's a story. I remember from my time in Thailand. One day we went to pay respects to a very senior monk in our tradition, and I think he was around 90 years old or so, and maybe even in his 90s, very old, and he had been a monk for many, many decades, and he was incredibly well respected as a meditation master. And we went to his monastery to pay respects to him, and there were many, many other people there. There were hundreds of people there at his monastery, and the scene was a little bit chaotic. There's different people going different, here and there, and kind of doing different things in the monastery. And then in the middle of all of it, he was sitting there, and there was this large crowd gathered around him, listening to him speak, and we went and sat down with him, and he's sitting there just incredibly at ease and incredibly radiant and with this big smile on his face. And he said he's kind of looking around at all of these people, hundreds of people in the monastery, and looking around, he kind of gestures and he says, I don't see anyone here. I don't see any people here at all. There's no one here. It's just elements. It's only earth, water, fire, air. That's all there is here. And anyone can say those words, but in that moment, hearing these words from somebody like him, who I had deep faith that he actually was telling the truth about his own experience. And it was obvious that the result of seeing things on that deep of a level, the result of seeing things as they actually are, is not fear or some kind of neutral, apathetic kind of state. The result is incredible happiness and freedom, ease, joy, bliss. So these are just a few thoughts for tonight. I wish everyone the best for their last day of practice. And I'll end it there. Thank you.